On steering and suspension test 5 is torsion bars connect lower control arms in the vehicle frame.
Yes.
That's right. That's the one. I just had it labeled. I had that thing labeled wrong. That's what it was. And so, what are torsion bars? Who has fooled with torsion bars? What is a torsion bar for?
Torsion bar can be used to set camber.
I wouldn't use them to set camber in most cases. But what you're going to do, a torsion bar is used in a place where you don't have room for a coil spring. You know, you've got leaf springs under the back of the truck usually. You've got coil springs under the front of the truck. But if you have a four-wheel drive, you actually have some CV axles going out to the front wheels to drive them, and they go right through where the coil springs need to go.
So is a torsion bar like a shock or something?
A torsion bar is like a spring. It's actually a long rod that's splined on both ends, and it actually hooks into that lower control arm in the front, and in the back you've actually got it's got like the ends of it will be like a wrench. You know, it'll actually go into that front one. It's locked into that front lower control arm, and it'll usually be a long thing. Something else that a lot of people have got to realize, if you ever take those out of there, there's a left and a right and a front and a back. So you better mark them. If you have to take them out, it's fine, but you mark left, right, front, and back. Don't just take them out and throw them on the floor and pick it up in any order and throw them back in there, because you're going to have issues if you do that. But basically, in the back there, you've got some little special made, and I call them wrenches for lack of anything else, because they go onto that torsion bar like a wrench, and then they got a little jack screw in there, and it'll twist that torsion bar. And that torsion bar is a piece of spring steel, but instead of operating like a coil spring or something, it twists. See, and so as those you'll see them on four-wheel drive pickups, like the one. You remember when Sean took the transmission out of that four-wheel? You see them long bars that were laid on the floor. Yeah, they had to pull them out of there. And when you're pulling the transmission on one, on a four-wheel drive truck, and in a lot of cases you had to pull them torsion bars out of there. And on like a Chevrolet truck, you're actually going to take the little jack screws loose to where they're loose, and then you're just going to pull them things out into the torsion bars. And on those, on the end of it, they're marked with arrows and all left and right and all that kind of stuff. So the long and short of it is the torsion bar is a spring, but it doesn't look like a spring. It looks like a bar. And since it's got it's got wrench flats on both ends. Is anybody not getting this? I mean, you understand what I'm talking about? The torsion bar being a spring, instead of having a coil spring, you got a spring that goes from about halfway back the frame on the truck, and it's a long bar. Now, how many of you ever noticed whenever you're trying to pull you get a long extension, and you get a socket, and you get a breaker bar, and you're trying to break something loose, you can feel that extension twisting, can't you? And it also gobbles up some of your force. You don't really get. Now, if you could get that torsion bar, that breaker bar, and put it right on that socket, you can break it loose fairly easy. But if you got a long extension, you got to overcome the twist of that extension before it actually breaks. And if you're using an impact wrench, that long extension will actually act as a torsion bar and keep it from breaking the bolt loose a lot of the time if it's real tight. So that's the long and the short of that. If it's long and it's the right kind of steel, you can actually twist it and use it for a spring. And what's amazing to me is I've never seen one break. You'd expect to pop sooner or later, but I've never seen that happen.
I imagine they'd have a better life than coil springs, would they?
Well, I would say yes. But coil springs get weak. Torsion bars can be adjusted. It's tough to do that with coil springs. So actually that one there, so they connect to the lower control arms and the vehicle frame, and that is true. A variable rate spring is made from a rod of constant diameter. No, it's not really. My dad's 66 Chevrolet 3/4 ton pickup had coil springs on the back. Now, a lot of these Crown Vickies and stuff have got coil springs under the back. But pickup trucks nowadays, they usually have leaf springs, and all that. And a lot of the time what we do when we're looking at leaf springs, we may say, what's really something, you see a leaf spring, it's got this thing in the back, like that, and then it's mounted solidly in the front, and it goes like this. And so, why does it need this? If it's mounted on the axle like that, and the axle's going to push it up, that leaf spring has got to get longer, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. So this right here is a hinge that lets it get longer and shorter. That has to be there. And you see that, you don't think about it, but if you start thinking about it like somebody that has to engineer things, and sometimes whenever I'm trying to figure out the way something works, I'll say, if I was going to build that, how would I overcome this obstacle, and then that's the obvious way to handle it. See?
But when you put a load on it, like
Put a load on it, that hinges back because that spring gets longer. You've seen those. You've seen those.
A buddy of mine took some out of his leaf springs to
lower
make
the
it,
rear end.
yeah, to lower the rear end a little bit because he had his truck like this and he didn't like it.
Yep, you can do that.
No, my question is, how safe is that?
It's not unsafe. I mean, you're just basically making the springs a little weaker.
That's a common thing.
You can add leaves to raise it up, or you can take leaves out and lower it. And all that. As long as I don't like the prospect of having just one leaf, holding it, because if that one leaf breaks, wham, but it doesn't usually happen.
He had two of them, and
Yeah,
3 weeks later he went, wham.
Yeah.
Like I started.
Yeah, he didn't hurt it if it's done right. He didn't hurt anything. Air springs are used primarily in automatic level control suspension systems, and that's true. If thing's going to have and this is right here, and I've waved this in front of the crowd before. Those air springs are basically a real tough sort of a balloon thing, and you'll see them on this black Crown Victoria that we inspect every now and then. And they have this little air solenoid that almost like a fuel injector, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's an air solenoid, but you got air coming in the top of it. It's a little air. And if you see that little thing, this little orange thing, you push that down to release the air line. Now, sometimes it wants to act like a jerk and not come out, even though you're doing it right, But the long and the short of it is, this thing here is fed by ground all the time, and the air suspension compressor sends power out to it. That opens it up. So if it's going to turn on its compressor, it's going to open this up, and it's going to pump air into those springs and raise the car up. But it's got a ride height sensor, and that ride height sensor actually is going to tell it if the car is too low or too high. So it can either let the air out, it's got to open these to do that too, and another solenoid up front, or pump air back in there. And so it opens these, it turns on the compressor, it pumps air back in here. Sometimes those springs will leak. If you got one that's consistently leaking down, what you do is really fairly easy to do. You pull the air springs off, you air them up with air hose, you put them under the water, and if they're bubbling, they're leaking. And you can't patch those suckers. You got to buy some. They make kits that you can buy to replace those air springs with regular springs. If it's going to be $500-600, for each side, and you want to just buy the kit to replace them with, because whenever they get to where they don't work anymore, you're riding around like a low rider bouncing hard, All right, let's see. Some shock absorbers contain both hydraulic fluid and compressed nitrogen gas. That's right. Have you ever noticed how some of these, I don't know if you guys, all of you put some of these new struts on there, you got to either cut a little loop off of that strut, or you got to turn it and it automatically extends. There's some of your books will say that shock absorbers don't hold the car up. Of course, load levelers will if you've got the ones with the springs on the outside of them. But the newer vehicles that have these nitrogen-charged shocks, the shocks actually do help support the vehicle. They didn't used to. I mean, some of your textbooks will say shocks don't support the vehicle. But if you've got a shock absorber and you push it down and then let go of it and it comes back up, it's going to be helping support the vehicle. And sometimes the vehicle will ride a little bit too low because the shocks will wear out. I mean, these front-wheel drive ones that's got struts and all of them, I've seen that too.
My favorite thing is seeing someone's car hopping down the road because they're shocked.
Yeah, that bounce, yeah. When one front wheel moves up, a stabilizer bar twists in an attempt to pick up the opposite wheel. Actually, that's pretty interesting, but I don't like the way they worded that. What it basically, we're not trying to pick up the opposite wheel. What we want to do is we want to keep the opposite wheel on the pavement. Whenever you're driving a car and you make a turn, and the car is going to try to, when you turn to the left, it's going to try to roll to the inside. Well, whenever it begins to roll and that lower control arm pushes up, the torsion bar is that long. You put those sway bar links, they also call it a sway bar. The stabilizer bar is what we're talking about. Not torsion bar. I said torsion bar and I meant to say stabilizer bar. But that curved bar that goes and hooks on both sides in the front, and y'all had it loose on your car too, Abby. You remember them long links that you had to take loose? They had the grease fittings on them. Those were hooked to the stabilizer bar. Okay, when one lower control arm goes up, it actually works through there, and it forces that other tire to stay on the pavement, and it also works to keep the body from rolling.
That's why Stokes' boy, he had that S10 with the 455 in it, and every time he took a turn, it looked like that thing was going to flip over one way or the other.
Yeah. Well, when the pickups and all are sitting on springs anyway. And if they've got a lot of the vehicles now, like SUVs, like my little Jeep Cherokee I used to have before I sold it to my nephew, it's got stabilizer bar on the back. If you look at a police car, this guy basically sitting on springs. It's not McPherson's strut. It's actually got stabilizer bar on the back axle and on the front. And that is to keep that thing for cornering. It's good for better cornering. Heavy springs and all that. If you put soft springs under something like that, it's going to roll over. It's going to turn over pretty easy, you know.
So then this is false then.
Yeah. Well, actually the answer key says it's true, but I mean I do not like the way that they worded that. But just put true on number 5. To prevent binding of any sway bar bushings, always tighten the bushing mounts or end links with the suspension suspended. That's false. Don't do it with the suspension suspended. It's always better to do it the other way. The drive wheels on front-wheel drive vehicles have adjustable wheel bearings. No, they do not. Compressed coil springs store a great deal of energy, and they can cause severe physical energy if mishandled. Yeah, that's right. Because when they let go, that's potential energy, and it's going to go somewhere. The one guy was telling me that when the person's struts first came out, he just sort of, jerked that nut off the middle of it with an impact wrench, and that spring went all over the shop. Boing, boing, boing. Well, what I used to do when I knew they were going to do that, I would lay them on the ground, and I would just go, and it would just slide apart. Which wasn't that big of a deal. But putting it back together, that's another issue. You're going to have something to squeeze them springs, put it back together. That's why we got this big Godzilla thing out here.
Me, Coach, and Daniel and Tyler used that thing?
Yeah, that's for the McPherson struts, yeah. Y'all did that.
Yeah.
You did that, didn't you?
Yeah. Buffer spring in the 50 cal machine gun.
Yeah.
Is supposed to be so powerful that if you got the back plate off that thing and you go to full the charging handle, it's supposed to have enough power. If you screw around with it wrong, it's supposed to have enough power that it can just punch through cinder blocks and stuff. A NCO over, or a cadre over a 50 cal, he's doing a class on it, and somebody is screwing around with it the wrong way and does something unsafe. He has the authority to kick the crap out of them to get them out of the way quick enough, or do whatever he has to do to get them out of the way before something. And that goes for if there's an officer even working on it.
That'd be about like standing behind a bazooka when they light it off. All right, so you can tell if a shock absorber is worn and needs to be replaced if when performing a bounce test, the front end of the vehicle bounces more than how many times?
Once.
If it bounces more than once. If it bounces twice, and some of them will just bounce and bounce and bounce, and they're not supposed to. The connection between the wheel spindle, steering knuckle assembly, and the control arm is provided by what? That's a B. Now think about what you're talking about here. The connection between the control arm. We're talking about the control arm, not the the tie rod end does what? What's the tie rod end, guys? That steers it.
Yeah.
That basically steers it. That's what turns your wheels back and forth. But your control arm is what? What's a control arm?
Control arm is...
That's that A-frame.
Yeah.
That's got a ball joint on it. And that's basically what that's talking about. There's on the B, the ball joints, what that is. When a front suspension system problem exists, do all of the following preliminary services except what?
Form a wheel alignment.
Yep. Yeah, well, if you got a suspension system problem, you need to take care of that before you do an alignment. And an independent rear suspension, where the rear wheels can move up and down independently of each other, what do you call that? That's rear suspension now.
Coil spring.
That's going to be strut, like on a Toyota. You got a strut on one side, a strut on the other side. If you've got a solid axle going from one side to the other, and the reason you call it independent is because if the right rear goes over a bump, the left rear don't even know it. But if you got a solid axle, if the right rear goes over a bump, the left rear is affected by that because it's all hooked together, you see. So if you've got two different sets of A-frames and you got some struts and springs back there.
Like that Celica we worked on?
Yeah, I like the Celica, yeah, that's pretty much. All right. And and this was great fun. Whenever my son Luke and his wife and kids came on they have a little 98 Camry that they drive to save gas. It's just a junky little car that I think their brother-in-law gave them or something. And we had to change the rear struts on it. He wanted us to do it. So we changed the rear struts, and we had to open the back doors and go under the package trays to take those things loose and all that kind of stuff. And Zach, that boy that was here earlier, went to back the thing off the lift and forgot to close the right rear door, and he just about tore the door slam off the car. And so I had to give him the keys to my car and have him drive over to Fulford's to get another door for the car, and we had to change out that door so they could drive back to Augusta. You know, that was a disaster with a capital D. All right, let me see here. 14, a front suspension where the weight of the vehicle is supported by the twisting spring action is what? That's torsion bar. Hold on, let me take this here. Hey. Okay, I'll see you when you get here. All right. That's got y'all all handled, or what?
You got number 9?
Number 9. Yeah.
That's true.
True.
It's a shock absorber and a coil spring combined in a single unit. McPherson's truck.